Hey guys, welcome to Digit.in, and today we're reviewing the Redmi Note 10. This is one of the three smartphones launched by Redmi in India. So there is the Redmi Note 10, the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max. We've already reviewed the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max, so make sure to check out that video as well. But for those of you who's actually interested in this particular smartphone, well, we've got all of the juicy bits for you with respect to its performance, camera, battery, everything. So make sure to subscribe to our channel before you proceed further, and of course hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. With that out of the way, let's begin. First off, let's go over the specs of the Redmi Note 10. This particular smartphone comes powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 678 chipset. For those of you not familiar with this, it's a very slight refresh of the Snapdragon 675, which launched about 2 years ago. So it retains the same 11nm process, it remains the same octa-core design. The only thing that really changes is there's a very slight bump in clock speed. More on that later. The phone also comes with 6 gigs of RAM, which is the unit we have here. There's an AMOLED display, which is pretty impressive at this price point. There's a 5000 mAh battery. The camera on here is a 48 megapixel primary camera. There's also 8 megapixel of ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro and a 2 megapixel depth sensor. So a quad camera setup in total. On paper, the Redmi Note 10 does feel impressive, but also leaves a few questions, especially with respect to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 678's performance. And that's what we're going to dig into today. So let's begin. So when it comes to benchmark numbers, this phone isn't clocking numbers that are, well, within the realm of impressive. For example, on the AnTuTu 8 score for the Redmi Note 10 is 239,622, whereas phones, for example, like the Poco M3 that recently launched with the Snapdragon 662 score 181,207. Narzo 30A, which comes with the Helio G85 chipset, scores 201,637. So great start for the Redmi Note 10 here. But as we move down the ladder, we see that while the CPU numbers remain impressive, it's the GPU benchmark where the phone lags. For example, 3D Mark Wildlife score on the Redmi Note 10 is 482 points, whereas on the Narzo 30A, it's 701. Similarly, on the GFX benchmark suite of tests, we see the Narzo 30A outperform the Redmi Note 10. When we move over to real-world gaming, we see the same kind of behavior, with Call of Duty Mobile having a median frame rate of just 48 FPS at low graphics and a stability of just 58%. Narzo 30A, on the other hand, had an average median FPS of 58 FPS and a stability of 87%. So we are seeing the Snapdragon 678 sort of not go toe-to-toe with its competitors. Of course, this really is a benchmark-based analysis, and while gaming for sure has not been the best experience, what has actually been pretty decent is the day-to-day usage. Now, what is interesting is if you have a lot of apps open in the background, the phone will very aggressively put them to deep sleep, and frankly, that's not so bad. Your applications like WhatsApp and all don't go into deep sleep state, so that's good because you don't miss those critical notifications. But especially for things like your photo editing apps, maybe even your browser, within which you may open maybe like 10 to 15 tabs, they will all be put to deep sleep. Speaking of browsing, by the way, if you do have that many tabs open, expect them to require a reload every now and then. Performance wise, the Redmi Note 10, it's sort of a hit or miss, to be very honest. Having used devices like the Narzo 30A and even the Poco M3, the Note 10's experience is not the smoothest out there. And speaking of smooth, let's straight away just dive into the display. The Redmi Note 10 comes with an AMOLED panel, which is going to be very impressive from the get-go. The display settings allow you to choose between a more natural tone, a saturated one, and an automatic mode. You also have the option of choosing your white balance, which is pretty impressive. However, when we put this phone through our CalMan display test, we found that the color reproduction was completely off the charts in the incorrect sense of things. That's not necessarily because the panel is inaccurate, but for some reason the processing engine of the display is still tweaking colors on the fly. So when Calman is sending this phone a display pattern, there's something is changing in the background which is causing an incorrect readout. So overall, the display, while to the eye seems fairly usable, it seems good. You can put it in saturated mode if you like poppy colors, or you can leave it to natural if you like more balanced and a less hurtful to the eye appearance. So if that's your thing, the Note 10's display is not that bad. It's bright enough to use outdoors, although the screen protector does cause a lot of reflection issues. Remove that and you should be fine. In indoor settings, the display does not go very dim, so we clock a peak brightness of 4 nits when using this in pitch darkness. So there is that. It's not the dimmest display out there, but overall it's fairly usable, especially because it also has a 180 Hz touch polling rate. So if you're gaming, unfortunately, while the gaming performance is not that great, but thanks to the polling rate, you do manage to still maybe get in the top 3 in the Call of Duty mobile match if you've got those skills. So that's display. Next, let's talk about the camera performance. Now, the Redmi Note 10's claim to fame is the 48 megapixel primary camera, and for all intents and purposes, you should be impressed. But for those of you who care, this is not a Sony IMX sensor, but instead an OmniVision unit. Now, using the primary camera, while the images do appear to be pretty good, especially when you're shooting in the bin mode, there are some caveats. The camera interface by itself is a little on the slower side, and taking photos, the whole experience is a little bit laggy. Right from the time where you try to focus on the subject, especially if you're trying to focus on something in particular, the focus is slightly slow. The shutter response is a hair slow, and if you try to do burst, so if you go from shot to shot to shot, there is significant lag between 2 shots. So overall, it's a fairly slow camera app, and not one that will always be reliable when it comes down to taking that one critical photograph, when you're trying to catch that fleeting moment. So if you're the kind of photographer who takes deliberate photos, who you'll stop, think, frame, with patience and then shoot, not a problem. But if you're always trying to catch action, this phone may not live up to the hype. Just saying. Then you have the ultra-wide camera, which, does pose some issues. There is notable distortion on the edges, there is noticeable fringing in high contrast areas, and the images come out a little on the softer side. So they're not the most sharp, while the center is, but you start seeing the softness from across the frame, in fact, as you move away from the center. Overall, the images are usable once you edit them, or if you're just looking to Instagram them, but as high resolution output, I wouldn't really put a lot of faith in that. Next, you have the macro camera, which is surprising because on the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max, it's a very impressive macro camera, 5 megapixel with autofocus. This is just a 2 megapixel dud macro camera because there is no autofocus, there is no focus peaking, and there's no image stabilization. So you will never really be sure if your shot is going to be in focus until you take it and look at it, by magnifying the image on the screen. It's a really frustrating experience to shoot macro on this smartphone, so not a lot of faith in that either. Next up, you've obviously got the sound. You've got a decent display to watch your videos on. You won't know how will the sound be when it comes out of the speakers. So the Redmi Note 10 actually does feature dual speakers, stereo speakers, that is, one on the top, one at the bottom. And they are asymmetric in their placement so that, no matter how you hold the phone, one speaker will always be outputting clear sound. Now, the speakers do get loud. They're decently usable if you're just sitting in a quiet room by yourself. But if you go into a noisy environment, they're not that loud, and they're definitely not very clear. You can definitely make stuff out if you're watching a movie or any sitcom or just casually listening to music by yourself. Again, in a quiet room, works fine. But if there is any amount of ambient noise, the speakers do get drowned very quickly. So sound output is pretty okay, nothing to really rave home about. But what's really cool is that you do get a headphone jack. So you can always plug in your favorite headphones, earphones, whatever you may have into this and enjoy the sound in a much better fidelity. Last but not the least, we've got the battery life on this phone, and that's something that definitely did leave me impressed. 5000 mAh, supports 33 watt fast charging, And given that it's an AMOLED display with a 60 Hz refresh rate, I'm getting about a day and a half easy on this. And when I say day and a half, my usage is not designed to, stress the battery. It's actually what I would do in my daily life. So which is taking calls, entertaining messages, watching a few YouTube videos, and even listening to music on the go. So between all of that, the battery life is about a day and a half of decent use. Charging it from 0 to 100 takes about 75 minutes, which is not bad. I mean, you could just plug it in while you're getting ready for work in the morning to get a decent amount of top up, or once you do get to work, you can plug it in then to just charge it up completely. Then you also have the built-in design of this phone. Now that's something that I really did like. The white finish on the Redmi Note 10 in my usage has actually been turning quite a few heads. And there was a time when white phones are very common, white plastic back. But in the last few years, we've seen so many colors, so many gradients, textured finish, so many things have happened. So the plain white back is now something of a novelty once again. And that really does turn heads. Second thing that's cool about this plastic white back is that it's definitely fingerprint resistant. So it will not show even if it does catch your fingerprint, because your fingers may be oily like mine, and it will not show those prints easily at all. Then there's the other thing with respect to the camera module. Now from afar, this camera module does resemble that of the Mi 10T Pros, and it sort of is a visual hint at a more premium offering than what it really is. At the end of the day, it's a nice touch, no doubt about it. You also have a side mounted fingerprint sensor, and interestingly, it's not as flat or wide as we've seen in competing devices. So it's actually pretty much exactly like a normal power button would be, but with a fingerprint sensor embedded into it. The cool thing is that it works reliably well, it's fast to unlock, and I have actually not had any issues using this at all. The front is of course Gorilla Glass 3, and the frame is also pretty amazing. I'm not too fond of the glossy silver finish on the frame, but once the phone goes in the case, none of that matters at the end of the day anyway. So let's conclude this review. Now the Redmi Note 10 does come with a few compelling features. It's got that large battery life, it's got that 48 megapixel camera, it's got that AMOLED display. But when it actually comes down to performance, whether it's gaming, especially gaming in fact, it lags behind the competition. Day-to-day performance, while today may be usable, I'm not sure if a year from now it will still be as smooth as it is today. Android devices do tend to get slower over a period of time as they get filled up and as they go through multiple iterations of apps being installed, removed, data being moved in and out of the phone. So while today this phone does live up to the day-to-day usage in a reliable fashion, again, not sure how it's going to be for the next 1 year. So who should buy this phone? That's a very important question. So if your budget is just 12,000 bucks, you could consider the Mi 10. No doubt about it. It's got a great set of features, and as long as you're willing to accept the fact that you're not going to have the fastest phone in the market, you should be fine. You still do get great battery life, you get a decent camera setup, you get a good display, and you also get headphone jack, expandable storage, dual SIM, all of that. And you also get a phone that's a good looking device. However, if you're looking for a smartphone that is actually going to deliver a good gaming experience, you may want to look somewhere else. Maybe consider the Narzo 30A, maybe even look at the Poco M3 for that matter, although that's slightly underpowered but does deliver on the promise of more stable gaming frame rates, not just the high ones. So there's that. So thank you guys for watching this video. I'm sure you'll have plenty of questions, so leave them in the comment section below. And before you leave, make sure to hit the subscribe button on our channel and also hit the bell icon so that you don't miss any future updates from us. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to see you in the next one.